A groundbreaking Supreme Court ruling has just been announced that legal scholars are describing as a fundamental transformation in how law enforcement officers can engage with armed citizens during routine traffic stops and residential encounters. This decision achieved something remarkable, a unanimous vote. All 9 justices stood together on this issue. The implications of their ruling could either strengthen your constitutional protections beyond anything we've seen before or introduce legal complexities that most citizens aren't prepared to navigate. Before we dive deeper, let me ask you something important. Have you subscribed to this channel yet? The information I'm about to share impacts every single firearm owner across the nation. Whether your preference is concealed carry, open carry, or simply maintaining a firearm for home protection, research suggests that 9 out of 10 gun owners won't learn about this judicial decision until they find themselves in a problematic situation. Make sure you subscribe right now so you're among the informed minority. I'm serious about this. Understanding this information could mean the difference between walking away from a police interaction without incident and potentially facing serious federal charges. What the court actually decided. Let me explain exactly what transpired. The Supreme Court issued a decision that fundamentally restructures how 2 critical constitutional amendments, the 2nd and the 4th, interact with each other during law enforcement encounters. You might be wondering right now, hold on, what connection does the 4th Amendment have with my firearm rights? The answer is absolutely everything. The 4th Amendment serves as your shield against unreasonable searches and seizures by government agents. The 2nd Amendment guarantees your right to possess and carry weapons. But here's where the situation becomes intricate and legally complex. When law enforcement personnel encounter you and become aware that you're carrying a firearm, does that discovery alone give them legal justification to conduct an expanded search of your person or property? Are they permitted to extend your detention beyond its original purpose? Can they remove your weapon without establishing a specific cause? These questions have generated legal confusion and inconsistent court rulings for generations, and this Supreme Court decision finally establishes clear answers, the case that changed everything. Let me walk you through the specific details of what occurred in the case that reached our nation's highest court. An individual was stopped by a police officer for a standard traffic code violation. While conducting the stop, the officer observed what appeared to be a bulge beneath the person's jacket. The officer inquired whether the individual was armed, and the person responded truthfully in the affirmative. This person possessed a valid concealed carry permit and was carrying their firearm in full compliance with state law. This is the moment when the situation took a problematic turn. The officer immediately commanded the person to exit their vehicle, physically removed the firearm from their possession, and then proceeded to conduct a comprehensive search of both the individual and their automobile. There was no warrant authorizing this search. There was no probable cause suggesting any criminal activity was occurring. The only factor prompting these actions was the presence of a legally possessed firearm. The officer's search yielded no illegal items or evidence of wrongdoing, but the person filed a lawsuit arguing that their 4th Amendment protections had been violated. The legal challenge progressed through the lower courts until it eventually reached the Supreme Court of the United States. The critical question. Before the court. The Supreme Court was presented with a question of enormous constitutional significance. Does the simple presence of a lawfully carried firearm automatically provide law enforcement with reasonable suspicion or probable cause to justify conducting a search? Consider how consequential this question really is. Throughout states that have enacted constitutional carry provisions or shall issue permit frameworks, millions of citizens legally carry firearms as part of their daily routine. If the court's answer had been affirmative, that yes, legal carry provides justification for searches, it would mean that any one of those millions of law-abiding citizens could be subjected to warrantless searches at any moment simply because they're exercising their Second Amendment rights. Such an outcome would essentially create an incompatibility between your Second Amendment right and your Fourth Amendment right. You would be forced to surrender one constitutional protection in order to exercise the other. That's a false choice no citizen should ever have to make. The unanimous ruling. Here's what the court determined. In a remarkable 9-0 unanimous ruling, the justices declared that the legal possession of a firearm cannot, standing alone, create reasonable suspicion or probable cause sufficient to justify a search. Let me repeat that for emphasis. The legal possession of a firearm cannot by itself justify a search of your person or property. This represents a major constitutional victory. The court explicitly stated that in jurisdictions where carrying firearms is permitted by law, whether through licensing systems or constitutional carry frameworks, law enforcement agencies cannot use the mere presence of that lawful firearm as the foundation for extending a detention beyond its original purpose, conducting a search without additional justification, or treating you as an inherent threat, absent additional specific and articulable facts that suggest criminal activity is occurring. What police can and cannot do now, this is where the ruling becomes particularly nuanced and important to understand correctly. The court did not declare that police officers can never temporarily disarm you during an encounter. What they said instead is this: police officers need specific, articulable facts that go beyond just the presence of the firearm itself. What does this mean in practical terms? It means that if an officer can point to your specific behavior, your statements, or the totality of the circumstances that would reasonably suggest a threat to officer safety or evidence that a crime is being committed, they retain the authority to take appropriate action. But they cannot take those actions based solely on the fact that you possess a firearm in a location where possessing that firearm is entirely legal. Understanding through examples. Example 1, the basic traffic stop. Let me provide you with a practical example to illustrate this principle. Imagine you've been pulled over because you have a broken taillight. The officer approaches your vehicle and requests your driver's license and vehicle registration. You inform the officer that you possess a concealed carry permit and are currently armed, which is actually required by law in numerous states. Under this new Supreme Court ruling, the officer cannot automatically order you to exit your vehicle, disarm you, and search your automobile simply because you disclose that you have a firearm. However, if during that exact same traffic stop you're displaying erratic behavior, there's an odor of alcohol coming from your vehicle, there are open alcohol containers visible in the car, or you make statements that could be interpreted as threatening, the situation changes dramatically. Now the officer has additional articulable facts. Those facts, when combined with the presence of a firearm, could potentially justify further investigative action. Example 2, home encounters. Here's an aspect of this ruling that many people haven't fully considered, but it has profound implications. This ruling doesn't just govern traffic stops. It affects welfare checks conducted by police. It affects what law enforcement calls knock and talks at your residence. It affects essentially any interaction with law enforcement where you happen to be legally armed. Let me explain why this matters so significantly for encounters that occur at your home. Police officers frequently conduct what they term a knock and talk procedure. They arrive at your door, they knock, and you answer. If you answer your door with a holstered firearm on your hip, which is perfectly legal in your own home in all 50 states, can police officers use that observation as justification to force entry into your home or demand to search your residence? Prior to this ruling, the legal answer to that question was unclear, and different federal circuit courts had issued conflicting rulings on the matter. Now the answer has been clarified definitively. No, law enforcement cannot use the presence of your lawfully possessed firearm as justification for entry or search unless they have additional specific facts suggesting criminal activity or danger exists. Important legal disclaimer. Before we go any further, I need to provide you with an important legal clarification. Everything I'm sharing with you constitutes educational information about this Supreme Court decision. This is not legal advice for your specific situation. You should always consult with a qualified attorney regarding your particular circumstances. Laws vary significantly from state to state, and every police encounter involves unique factors and circumstances. What I'm providing here is the legal framework that the Supreme Court has established, but how that framework applies to your personal situation will depend on your specific state laws and the particular facts of any encounter you might have. Practical implications for gun owners. 1. Know your state's notification requirements. Let me break down what this ruling means for you in practical, everyday terms. First and most importantly, if you carry concealed or open carry, you absolutely must know your specific state's notification requirements. Some states have laws that require you to immediately inform an officer that you're armed the moment you're stopped. Other states have no such requirement whatsoever. The Supreme Court ruling doesn't change those state notification requirements one way or another. What it changes is what happens after you've provided notification or after the officer has discovered you're armed. 2. Maintain respect during encounters. Second, and I cannot stress this enough, just because this ruling protects you from automatic searches based solely on legal firearm possession does not mean you should be careless or confrontational during police encounters. You should comply with lawful orders. You should be respectful in your communications. You should never make sudden movements that could be interpreted as threatening. This ruling protects your constitutional rights from violation, but it doesn't shield you from the consequences of behavior that gives officers specific, articulable safety concerns based on your actions. 3. Document everything. Third, this is absolutely critical for protecting your rights. Document everything. If you're ever in a situation where you believe an officer searched you or detained you solely because you were legally armed, you need to document every single detail immediately after the encounter. Write down the officer's name and badge number if possible. Make note of the exact time, the precise location, and the complete sequence of events as they occurred. Note what you said to the officer and what the officer said to you. This documentation becomes absolutely crucial if you need to challenge the constitutionality of the search at a later time. What most people get wrong. Here's what the vast majority of people misunderstand about their rights. They assume that because a search already happened, there's nothing they can do about it after the fact. This is completely wrong. If evidence was gathered during a search that violated your constitutional rights, that evidence can be suppressed and excluded from court proceedings. If you were charged with a crime based primarily on that illegally obtained evidence, those charges could potentially be dismissed entirely. This ruling provides you with powerful legal tools to challenge unconstitutional searches, but only if you have detailed, contemporaneous documentation of what occurred. Broader constitutional principles. Here's something even more significant that extends from this ruling into broader constitutional law. The court's reasoning doesn't just apply to firearms specifically. It reinforces a fundamental principle about how constitutional rights interact with each other. The court essentially declared that you cannot be punished or treated with suspicion simply for exercising a constitutional right in a lawful manner. This principle could have ripple effects that extend far beyond gun rights and Second Amendment issues. It reinforces the foundational idea that constitutional rights are not privileges granted by the government that can be suspended whenever it becomes convenient for law enforcement operations. They are fundamental protections that must be respected, even when respecting them makes law enforcement's job more challenging. The remarkable unanimity. Now, let me tell you about any dissenting opinions in this case. Actually, there weren't any dissenting opinions. This decision was unanimous, 9-0. In today's deeply polarized Supreme Court, where justices often split along predictable ideological lines, this unanimity is genuinely remarkable. Justices appointed by liberal presidents and justices appointed by conservative presidents all agreed on this fundamental principle. Why did they all agree? Because the underlying logic is sound and compelling. If lawful behavior can be treated as inherently suspicious simply because it involves exercising a constitutional right, then that right doesn't truly exist in any meaningful way. It becomes merely an illusion of protection. The court understood this danger and acted unanimously to prevent it. Implementation challenges. But here's something even more important we need to address. How will police departments across the country respond to this ruling? That's the crucial question that will determine whether this decision makes a real difference in people's lives. Supreme Court rulings don't automatically and immediately change police behavior on the streets. Police departments need to update their training protocols and procedures. Individual officers need to be educated about the new legal standard they must follow. And here's an uncomfortable but important truth. Some officers won't immediately know about this ruling, and some may choose to disregard it either through ignorance or deliberate choice. That's precisely why you need to know about this ruling yourself. When you understand your rights thoroughly, you can respectfully assert them during encounters. You can say things like, "Officer, I'm happy to cooperate with you, but I do not consent to any searches of my person or property. Am I being detained for a specific reason, or am I free to go?" These questions require the officer to articulate specific reasons for their actions, rather than relying on blanket assumptions about armed citizens. Another practical example, example 3, the welfare check scenario. Let me give you another detailed hypothetical example to make this crystal clear. Imagine you're at home and police officers knock on your door to conduct a welfare check. Perhaps someone called law enforcement expressing concern about your well-being. You answer the door with your handgun holstered on your hip. The officer observes the firearm and demands to enter your home to ensure you're not a danger to yourself or to others. Under this new Supreme Court ruling, the presence of your legal firearm in your own home cannot serve as the justification for entry. The officer would need additional specific, articulable facts suggesting you actually pose a danger. Are you making statements suggesting you intend to harm yourself? Are there visible signs of a physical struggle or disturbance? Is someone inside your home calling for help? Those would constitute specific, articulable facts. But simply possessing a firearm in your own home, not sufficient under this ruling. What could save you from serious charges? Here's information that could potentially save you from spending years in prison. Let's say you find yourself in a situation where police officers want to search you or your property based solely on your possession of a legal firearm. You need to take 3 specific actions. First, clearly and explicitly state that you do not consent to the search. Say it out loud and say it clearly. Make sure your statement is captured on body camera if the officer is wearing one, which most officers now do. Second, do not physically resist the search under any circumstances. If officers insist on conducting the search despite your verbal objection, allow them to do so without physical resistance. Your verbal non-consent protects your legal rights for any future challenge, but physical resistance can result in additional serious charges against you. Third, contact an attorney immediately after the encounter concludes. Time is a critical factor. The sooner you initiate a legal challenge to an unconstitutional search, the better your chances of successfully suppressing evidence or getting charges dismissed entirely. Future implications of this ruling. Let's discuss the future implications of this ruling, because legal experts and constitutional scholars are already analyzing how this decision will affect other areas of gun law and gun policy. For example, consider red flag laws. If police officers arrive at your home to confiscate firearms under a red flag order or extreme risk protection order, can they use the presence of legal firearms in your home as justification to search for additional weapons beyond what the specific order authorizes? Under the reasoning of this ruling, probably not without additional specific facts suggesting criminal activity. Another area where this ruling will have significant impact is concealed carry reciprocity. If you're traveling through multiple states that have different and sometimes contradictory gun laws, this ruling strengthens your Fourth Amendment protections against unreasonable search and seizure in any state where your carry is legal under that state's laws. But remember, and this is important, it doesn't protect you in states where your method of carry is illegal. You still have an absolute obligation to know and understand the laws of every single state through which you travel while armed. Impact on prosecutorial tactics. Here's an aspect of this ruling that almost nobody is discussing, but absolutely should be. This ruling also affects how prosecutors can use firearm possession as evidence of criminal intent in court proceedings. In some jurisdictions, prosecutors have historically argued that possessing a firearm during an encounter with police was itself evidence of intent to commit a crime or demonstrated consciousness of guilt. This ruling significantly undermines that prosecutorial argument. If the legal possession of a firearm doesn't create reasonable suspicion for law enforcement officers conducting an investigation, it certainly cannot be used by prosecutors as evidence of criminal intent in jurisdictions where that possession is entirely legal. Essential takeaways. Let me summarize the absolutely essential points you need to remember from this discussion. The Supreme Court ruled unanimously that legal possession of a firearm cannot, standing alone, justify a search or seizure under the Fourth Amendment. This protects your Second Amendment rights from being used to undermine your Fourth Amendment rights. Police officers can still take action based on specific, articulable facts that go beyond merely observing that you have a firearm. Officer safety concerns must be based on your specific behavior and the totality of circumstances, not just gun possession. You need to know your state's notification laws regarding informing officers that you're armed. These vary significantly by state. You need to document every police encounter thoroughly, especially if you believe your rights were violated. You need to clearly state you do not consent to searches while never physically resisting if officers proceed anyway. Why this matters. This ruling represents a massive victory for gun owners specifically and for constitutional rights more broadly. But a victory that exists only on paper in a court opinion doesn't mean anything in the real world if citizens don't understand how to assert and protect those rights during actual encounters. That's why educational content like this matters. That's why I break down complex legal rulings and translate them into language you can actually understand and apply. The legal system is complicated by design, but understanding your rights shouldn't require a law degree. One final legal reminder before we conclude. This content is provided for educational purposes only and does not constitute legal advice. Laws vary dramatically from state to state, and every situation involves unique facts and circumstances. You should always consult with a qualified attorney licensed in your jurisdiction before making any legal decisions or taking any legal actions. But education is your first and most important line of defense against rights violations. And now you're educated about one of the most significant Supreme Court rulings affecting gun owners that's been issued in the past decade. Stay safe out there, know your rights, and exercise them responsibly.